lawman all my life. I was a night watchman for the city of La Crosse. I was city marshal for the city of La Crosse. I was a deputy sheriff, undersheriff, and sheriff of La Crosse County, but I'm not here to talk to you about all that today. I'm here to tell you about 2 days in my life, April 6th and April 7th, 1862. At that time I was Lieutenant George Staley, Company D, 14th Wisconsin. We had just arrived at Savannah, Tennessee, and I'll never forget that morning. We were split into 3 sections. We were one army on the move. We were ready to take the city of Corinth, but we were separated at the time into 3 portions. Part of the army was bivouacked at Pittsburgh Landing on the south side of the Tennessee River, and part of the army was where I was, and my men were in Savannah, and another part was under Lew Wallace. And I'll tell you, I can't tell you where Lew Wallace's army was. In fact, Lew Wallace couldn't tell you where his army was that day, and nobody knows. That's another story. I'm going to tell you my story. April 6th, I woke up. I thought a storm was gathering because I could hear the rolling thunder in the distance, and as I came out of the tent, I was surprised that it was a day like this, a beautiful Sunday morning, breeze, sunshine, blue skies. It wasn't a storm at all. It wasn't very long before we realized a terrible battle was taking place on the south side of the river. We had pictured the Rebs quaking in their boots in Corinth as we marched on them, but they had a general by the name of Sidney Johnson that had other plans, and what he planned was a surprise attack on a portion of the army at Pittsburgh Landing, and surprise he did. They rolled into that camp, and there were 4 types of Union soldiers in that camp. They're all pretty much green, but there were 4 types that day. Those that stood and fought and died right where they stood. Those that dropped their guns and ran. Those that fired a few times and ran, and those that stood and fought all day long. And I want to let you know that 16th Wisconsin knew some of those boys were with them, and they were one of the regiments that stood and fought. In fact, they left their dead on every portion of that battlefield, and they lost their whole honor guard in that fight. There's one portion of the army under Benjamin Prentice, and thank God for Benjamin Prentice. He realized that if we don't stop this tide, that the entire army is going to be destroyed. So he arranged a line in a sunken road that traversed the battlefield, and it was bordered by, if you can picture it, brush and trees. And they laid down in that road, and there was it looked out on an empty field that he figured the Rebs were going to have to cross, and sure enough they did. And as they crossed that field, they opened up on those Rebs and drove them back, and the Rebs charged again and charged again and charged again. Prentice's men kept driving them back. The Rebs called it the Hornet's Nest, and they were as determined to take it as the Prentice was to hold it, but they couldn't take it until finally one general by the name of Ruggles gets this idea. He put 62 cannon, hub to hub, across the field, directed right at the Hornet's Nest, and opened fire. Now Prentice had one option at that point, surrounded and on one side covered by cannon. He surrendered, but I'll tell you, his fight lasted from the morning till 5:30 in the afternoon, and by the time the Rebs were done with that fight and surrender, they were demoralized to the point where they decided to stop the push. Finish the work tomorrow. Bad move on their part because Ulysses S. Grant had arrived on the field, and I'll tell you, Grant, that S didn't stand for us surrendering. I'll tell you that right now. When he was told how bad it all was, his only response was, "Yep, lick 'em tomorrow, though." And he arranged a line, and that's where we come in, because we stood. We had issued, as soon as we found out the battle, we issued 40 rounds of ammunition to our men, rations, and then we formed up to be transported. But we waited all day, and we didn't arrive at Pittsburgh Landing until 10 o'clock that night. And by then, there was a storm. There was a pouring rain, and every type of conveyance was in that landing, and a sea of humanity, half the army fixing to get out of the battle, and half the army fixing to get into it. And I was with that half. And we moved into a position, and I find out now that we were the right flank of the left wing of the army. And it was a good ground chosen by Grant himself good cover, and we waited there. I let the boys sleep all night in that pouring rain. I stayed awake and watched. But